office, on my computer, writing. She would climb on my lap and say, I want to do that. And I'd say, okay. So she'd start dictating stories for me to write down. And her stories would always be about a little girl, normally called Holly, who would come home and go into the kitchen and see her mother. But it wasn't her mother. It was an evil witch to be her mother. And then the evil witch would lock her up in the basement with the dead children. And then the dead children and Holly would have to escape. And the witches would come after them. And these were these great nightmarish stories. And I thought, well, this is really good. I should go and find stories like this to read her. So I went down to my local bookshop and I said, what have you got in the way of really scary sort of horror stories for like 4 or 5 year olds? And they gave me a look. I was like, okay. I thought, well, I'm going to have to do this one myself. Nobody's got me. So I started writing Coraline was just a book filled with the kinds of things that Holly loved in her stories. And then it became this thing that became very important for me while I was writing it, to try and tell my kids the stuff that I'd figured out over, whatever it was, 30-something years on this planet at that point. And I thought, well, I figured out the biggest thing that I wish that I'd known when I was a kid was that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. Because when I was a kid, I thought I was a coward. And I thought I was a coward because things scared me. If I had to walk home from school in the winter, dead at night, down...
You were past school till late at night?
I don't know how it is in Norway, but in England in the winter it's dark by 3:30. Walking home in the middle of the night. It's 4 o'clock.
Never been to
It's dark.
But it's dark and scary, yes.
It is very dark and scary. You walk home past, through little rock cuttings with trees overhead and dead houses where nobody lives, and it was terrifying. And I think I am such a coward. And it wasn't until I was an adult and I thought, actually, it wasn't that I was a coward, it was that I didn't understand. I thought being brave meant you're not scared. That's not true. Being brave means you're absolutely scared and you do the right thing anyway. You walk home. It's a brave thing to do. You do it. When you're not scared, that doesn't mean you're brave. That just means, well, you're not scared. It's easy. So I thought I'd write a book that would have that in, that would have something scary, something dark, something that you had to actually fight that scares the hell out of you.
Yeah.
But you do the right thing anyway. And that, for me, was the big important thing with Coraline.
Yeah. Right. So, and it's also a movie, as I showed.
It is. Henry Selick.
It's one of the very few of your works that has been made into a movie, but let's get back to that later. You also wrote the Churchyard book. The Graveyard Book.
The Graveyard Book.
The Graveyard Book.
Well, that book actually, I did kind of steal it. Again, okay, the thing where all of my good children's books come from my kids.
Yeah.
So my son Mike, when he was small and new, about 2.5 years old, more than anything in the world, he loved his tricycle. Now the house we lived in was like flats above a shop, and it was very, very tall and thin. So practically every room was on a different floor with stairs between them, which meant that I couldn't let Mike ride his tricycle in the house, because he would die. So every day, and we didn't have a garden or anything, but across the road was a graveyard. So every day I would take him in his tricycle down the stairs, he'd cross the road, he'd walk into the graveyard, and he would cycle happily round and round the gravestones. And I just remember looking at him one day and going, he looks so happy. He looks absolutely at home here. And I thought, you know, I could do a story about a little kid in a graveyard. And then I thought it would be like Dickens's, it would be like Kipling's The Jungle Book. Only instead of being a little baby who wanders into a jungle, brought up by wild animals and taught the things that wild animals know, you'd be a baby wandering into a graveyard, raised by dead people, and taught the things that dead people know. And it was very, at that moment it seemed so simple. And I went up to my office and I wrote a page. I was about 25, maybe 26, and I read the page and I went, this is terrible. And it's a really good idea, which means that I need to become a better writer before I try and write this book, because I do not want to waste it. It's one of those ideas that you get that you don't want to waste. So every few years I would try writing a page and I'd look at it and I'd go, no, you're not ready yet. And then round about 2003, I think I'd finished A Nancy Boys. And I remember thinking, I'm not getting any better anymore. I'm probably as good as I'm going to be. So it doesn't matter now if I'm good enough to write it.
And your son was grown up.
He was tall.
He didn't go with a tricycle anymore.
No, at that point, he discovered the bicycles. Yeah. And he was well on his way to, he had plans to be American Olympic team bicyclist, and then a car wanted to occupy the same space in the road that he did, and he came home with his leg all broken, and he sat on the couch with me and we watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Well, did the entire box set.
Interesting. So this is the Jungle Book, Mowgli in the churchyard, in the way that, and you know, Mark Twain has done children's books with churchyard scenes, and Charles Dickens.
Oh yes, well, of course.
So you're in a good tradition there. Then, why you are here is the fact that this book is out. Fortunately, the milk.
This is my excuse for being here.
Yes. But we found out that you have written other books as well. But this one has even got a prize already. It's quite new.
Yes, it's just come out. It's the one that I've signed. I went and pre-signed this afternoon. I ran in here, like 35 minutes, just signed. Like a madman. The idea being that for any of you who after this talk go, well, I could go and get something signed, I could get into that line, or I could go home, eat, and let the babysitter off. I think I'll go home. You can buy a signed book. So that was my brilliant idea. But yes, that one actually, the weird thing about that book is that actually only half started with stealing an idea from one of my children. Because the idea that I stole from one of my children was the same son, Mikey, little Michael. When he grew up a little bit more, he was no longer a 2-year-old, he was probably about 5, maybe even 6. And I did something terrible. If you are ever, any of you are a parent, one day you will say one of those things that are unforgivable, which will be something like, don't you think it's your bedtime now? I said one of those things. And he just looked at me. He looked up at me and he put his hands like this and he said, oh, I wish I didn't have a dad. He said, I wish I had. And then you could see him stop. Because he had to think, what else can you have? And he thought about it for a minute, then he said, I wish I had goldfish. And he went off to bed. And he's like, yeah, and that is brilliant. I am stealing that. So I wrote a book called The Day I Swapped My Dad for 2 Goldfish, which was completely stolen from that, in which a dad reads the newspaper and is swapped by his kids for other things with other kids, and he never notices because he's reading his paper. And then time passed, and that book has been out now since, I think it was published in like 1998, and at signings I would keep seeing fathers. They would ask me to sign it for them, and they'd say, oh, my kids gave it to me as a Father's Day present. And I would feel guilty, because I'd be going, you know, it's kind of a daddist book. It says that fathers are useless. We just read the paper. And then it was like, okay, I am going to get revenge on behalf of fatherdom everywhere on me. I will write the book that proves how fantastic dads are. Plus, I started thinking about it. And I started thinking, okay, how many books are there for children with good dads in? I thought there are practically none. Most authors just kill the parents before the book starts, or get them off stage. You know, Harry Potter or Roald Dahl. It's the rhinoceros. You know, it's not. It's you get parents are ineffectual because you want the kid to do stuff. So I thought, right, I'm going to write my book about how cool dads are from the point of view of dads, because frankly dads are the only people in the universe who believe that they are cool.
That joke.
And it was that basically created Fortunately the Milk. So it's and like everything probably I have ever written, it is a story about storytelling.
Yeah.
In this case, perhaps rather more obviously, most of the things I've done.
Yeah.